All right, so now let's do a couple of examples of t-tests. And for these, we're not going to do these by hand. We're only going to do them in StatCrunch. So for this first example, we have a sample of 30 adults with narcissistic personality disorder, and we suppose they have a mean of 129 Facebook friends with a standard deviation of 41. And we want to test whether their mean exceeds the national average of 120. And by the way, I just made up those numbers, so I don't know if that's the national average or not. So we got StatCrunch. So we're going to go to Stat, T-Stats, one sample with summary. And our sample mean was 129 with a standard deviation of 41. Our sample size was 30. And we want to test how mu compares to 120. We want to test whether that's greater than. All right? So we just input those values, click compute, and that gives us our test statistic and p-value. So we'll just copy that, paste it over here. And so here we have our hypotheses, which you always have to write. We have our test statistic and p-value, and then we need to reject H naught if p-value is less than, in this problem, 0.01. And here our p-value is not less than 0.01, therefore we would fail to reject H naught and say that there is not sufficient evidence to conclude that mu is greater than 120. In other words, we can't determine from this data whether people who have narcissistic personality disorder have more Facebook friends than average. So that's all you have to do on that problem. One thing I forgot to mention is, why do we know this is a t-test? Well, on this problem, the standard deviation that we're looking for, this standard deviation comes from the sample of 30. If you remember back to that slide in the last week's PowerPoint about how do you know T versus Z, this is one of those examples where sigma is not known, because we have a sample of 30 adults that have this standard deviation of 41. So that right there makes it a t-test. All right, so that's the first problem. Second problem is this one right here. We have an oral surgeon keeping track of the ages at which patients were having their wisdom teeth removed. So this is our data, and we want to use this to test whether the population mean mu differs from 20. So I copy the data, and I'm going to take it over to StatCrunch and paste it. And we want to test whether it's differs from 20. All right. So we're going to Stat, T-Stats again, because they're not giving us the population standard deviation. One sample, and this time we have data. So that's one sample with data. Remove the variable over, and our hypothesis test for mu is mu equals 20 versus mu differs from 20. And we will compute. We'll copy and paste back over here. So now we have our hypotheses and our test statistic and p-value. We're going to reject H naught if the p-value is less than, and here they didn't give you a value for alpha, That's okay. If they don't give you a value for alpha, just use 0.05. So in this case, our p-value is less than 0.05. Therefore, we reject H0 and say that there is sufficient evidence to conclude the population mean differs from 20. And you can see by looking at the sample mean, it looks like it's greater than, but because this is differs from, we'll say not equal to or differs from. All right, so that's our two examples.